Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and welcome to another episode of Mental Health Matters with me, your host, Maryam Hilli. And joining me on this weekly show is Sister Anisa Diab, our very own mental health professional. Welcome to the show, Sister Anisa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being back. So today we are going to be talking about how to manage panic attacks and anxiety. A lot of people are currently going through life changes, and people are getting married, people have got some end of year exams, and some people are having babies for the first time, and these are all anxiety inducing situations. So, Sister Anisa, to start us off with, can you explain to our viewers the difference between somebody who's suffering from anxiety and somebody who is just going through everyday stresses of life?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Maryam, and our dear viewers. So stress and anxiety share a lot in common, right? When you are in a state of stress, you're in a heightened state of fear, right? So many of us know what it's like to have fear about the unknown, especially in the past year, 2020, with this pandemic, fear of getting sick, fear of dying. We're just worried about something that hasn't happened yet. We all get stuck in the future from time to time. But when somebody is struggling with anxiety, this is a severe form of stress. So this, in this situation, the individual is going to perceive danger or a threat, even if there's nothing to be concerned about. It's a constant chronic feeling of not feeling safe in one's life. So anxiety really hijacks the entire body, and it prevents an individual from being able to function or even have meaningful relationships in their life. It can look like not being able to get out of bed in the morning and go to work. It can look like being fearful of being in a public space, or even having some claustrophobia, being fearful of driving in a car or being in an enclosed area. So I think one of the scariest things about having anxiety, especially that my clients struggle with from time to time, is panic attacks. So when you have a panic attack, this is crippling, and some people can struggle with this all day long, where they're in and out of feeling okay, and then suddenly they just have so much stress to the point that they can't breathe properly, they feel dizzy, their heart is racing, and they feel like they may be dying sometimes. So it's really, really important for us to realize that anxiety does not happen overnight. This is something that builds up over time. And even if some of our viewers who are tuning in today may not be struggling with, anxiety on a clinical level, it's still really important to be informed about it, because again, none of us are immune, as we talked about in our last episode, to mental health issues. So the more we educate ourselves, the more we are aware, really prevention is the best intervention.
Kind of on the topic of anxiety, a lot of us tend to use the phrase, this is giving me anxiety, whenever there's a stressful situation. And as we're kind of like trying to inform ourselves on the topic, should phrases like that be used or not?
That's a really good question. I do think language matters, especially when we're talking about mental health. And I think that, saying the word anxiety, this is giving me anxiety, or I'm feeling anxious, it's part of the vernacular, it's part of the commonplace language that we tend to use. But I think, there's not a problem in saying this is giving me anxiety, but more in the sense of not being able to distinguish when somebody else who is saying they struggle with anxiety, what they really might mean is a different kind of anxiety, a different kind of stress than maybe a regular stressor that you may be going through. So if somebody comes into work and says, I really need accommodations because I struggle with anxiety, I mean, sometimes that person on the other side may not be informed. What do you mean? We all struggle with anxiety, but it's different, right? We have to make that distinction that, it's not just regular stress for that person. And even like in the United States, for example, if an employee comes in and says, I really need accommodations for anxiety, I've been meeting with a therapist, I have a diagnosis, they have like laws here to accommodate those individuals. So I think it's just important to double check and ask with the person, like, what do you mean by anxiety? Do you mean just regular stress, or do you struggle with a more severe kind of stress?
Okay, and when we're talking about anxiety, I get the feeling that it's sort of used as a negative terminology. But can feeling anxious ever be a good thing, or being stressed? Can it serve as a healthy purpose or not, in your opinion?
Yes, it definitely can. That's a really great question, because when you experience stress, it can be life-saving in certain situations, right? Like if you are driving on the road and all of a sudden a car pulls out in front of you, you're going to get this adrenaline rush that prompts you to quickly put your foot on the pedal and brake. So that is an example where stress is really important. If you're in a forest and a bear starts running after you, you better hope that you get the adrenaline rush and you go into flight mode to get yourself to safety. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has definitely created all emotions for a reason, and stress is no exception to that. We need stress to survive, and Allah has put this stress response system in us for an important purpose.
Okay, when it comes to anxiety, are there certain things that trigger anxiety? And when we talk about triggers, what do we mean by triggers? And what are some of the common triggers for anxiety?
That's a great question. So a trigger is in mental health, it refers to something that affects your emotional state to the point that it causes overwhelm or it causes some form of psychological distress. So when somebody says that they're feeling triggered, what they mean is they're experiencing an emotional reaction to something that is disturbing to them. And we all have triggers. None of us, just go through life without being triggered by something. But it's really our job to do a lot of self-reflection in our day and see what situations, what kinds of stressors may be contributing to our own mental disturbances or shifts in the day. A trigger can be anything from a sight, smell, sound, even a person can be a trigger. And an example would be even a past trauma. For example, somebody who's in war, maybe they experienced a certain situation and they might experience flashbacks as a result of that. So they tend to, at certain points, perhaps lose track of their surroundings. They may go back and relive some of those experiences that they went through in war. Another trigger for people can also be social media. If somebody is struggling with their body image, for example, and going into starvation mode from time to time, maybe they're struggling with anorexia, seeing an image of somebody who is the ideal for them, that could be a trigger for some of their eating disorder issues. Or even just somebody coming out of a divorce and seeing all these pictures on social media of somebody who is, getting married, that can be a trigger for them to have a lot of resentment or anger in their hearts.
Okay, and how can individuals identify, their own triggers?
So basically, I always recommend this. I recommend to document when you're starting out trying to identify your triggers. Do a thought journal. Document what you are experiencing throughout the day. So if you notice you're pretty calm, and then all of a sudden you start to notice a shift in your mood, ask yourself, okay, what's going on here? What was the activating event or situation that prompted this shift? Maybe it was something somebody said to me. What am I feeling right now? What's my thought process? What's my behavioral response? And, of course, this can be cumbersome to do for a long period of time, but if you get into the habit of doing this for a week or two, you start to notice a pattern in terms of what kinds of triggers you have, and also what type of predominant emotion you're experiencing. So, I do this all the time with myself, and of course, I've gotten to a point where I don't have to really write things down, but suddenly I might be feeling just, annoyed or agitated. And I say, wait a second, like I was just okay a few minutes ago. What prompted that? Sometimes we forget there's a buildup of different things throughout the day and we forget where we are. So I recommend for somebody just starting out to do that thought journal and then notice the pattern so that you can become more aware and develop the right coping strategies down the road, inshallah.
And is there a way that we can perhaps help those around us notice their triggers? Because if we can keep a journal for ourselves, but how about if we're trying to help someone else with their anxiety? Is there a way for us to be able to identify their triggers? Do we keep a diary for them? What's the protocol for that?
Yes. So I recommend you have to be very careful when you're giving feedback to other people about what you notice with their triggers in terms of how you're conveying what you're observing. So, you can say something like, you know what, I noticed that, I don't know if you noticed this about yourself, but I noticed that whenever we're in this particular situation, you tend to become very quiet. What's going on for you in that moment? Sometimes people just they're not even aware of what they're doing. They need that feedback from other people that they're exhibiting certain behaviors they're not conscious of. So I think whenever you give feedback, you want to use I statements. You want to talk about what you're noticing, what you're observing in the person. You just want to be careful not to come across as judgmental and say, oh, you're so triggered every time you do this. Do you not realize your triggers? You just have to do it in a very tactful way. But it is important, I think, for us to give feedback to others and those we love. And even Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam talked about how the believers are like mirrors to one another, and we give each other a reflection of what we see, even if that means a defect in what we see in one another. We all have triggers. We all have areas of weakness that we have to work on, and we're all here to grow, inshallah.
Sister Anisa, how can we recognize the warning signs in our friends and our family members when they may be experiencing anxiety that might require professional help?
So we want to make sure that we're reading between the lines in what people are saying and in their behaviors too. Oftentimes when people have anxiety, they are trying to hide it. They're trying to mask it. So they may be, really joking a lot. They may be smiling all the time. And you wouldn't really, just looking at the person, think this is somebody who may be struggling with anxiety. But when you're talking to them, and you hear some of the things that they might be talking about with you, it can give you an indication that there's something more going on. For instance, if somebody's discussing how low their confidence is and that they just don't believe in themselves, and you notice that person is withdrawing more and more and more from social situations, that could be a red flag there that something's wrong. Or if they're losing like interests and things that they typically like to do. Maybe they love traveling and meeting with friends, and now they're just not into that anymore. They may be trying to cope with that in ways that are maladaptive, that are not healthy. So sometimes, with anxiety, a person will try to self-injure themselves. They will try to make up for it with, drug usage, with other kinds of forms of behavior that are not healthy. So you want to make sure that you check in with your friends and family and say, hey, is everything okay? I noticed, as we talked about with the language before, I noticed that it just seems like everything's off with you a little bit lately. You seem like you're struggling to get out of the house. You've been talking a lot about how you don't believe in yourself lately. I'm noticing, scratch marks on your arm. What's that about? Are you okay? That could be a sign that there's self-injury going on. It's just about talking in a way that's coming from a place of compassion, asking a lot of open-ended questions and describing what you're noticing. And people will, sometimes be really upset with you mentioning something that they're trying to hide, and just know that that's normal. But, if you come from a place of compassion, just trying to understand, not trying to be haram police with them, but just, understanding the full picture and asking, how can I help? That can go a long way in getting somebody the right support, because they feel like somebody else really cares and that they don't have to keep wearing the mask anymore.
Okay, and when it comes to getting professional help, some people are quite hesitant to seek professional help, but I kind of want you to help our viewers understand what kind of mental health concerns can manifest in people who perhaps have unresolved anxiety issues.
So that's, yeah, it's really important to realize that with any mental health issue, there are different levels, right? And anxiety is no exception to that. So you can have mild anxiety, moderate, or severe. And, for some people with mild to moderate, they have their coping strategies that they do to manage. But when it becomes to a point of severity, that's where it can be a real struggle. So anxiety that's not addressed, that just builds up over time. What happens is the body has this chemical imbalance of too much adrenaline, too much cortisol in it. And that creates these cogs, this system within the body where now it's a default mechanism. So anything can manifest from generalized anxiety disorders, panic attacks, can go to the point of becoming panic disorder, where somebody may be having a panic attack multiple times a week, even multiple times a day. Obsessive compulsive disorders can also manifest, where a person has these intrusive thoughts and these rituals that they do to try to manage those thoughts, such as, for example, checking 20 times to make sure the oven is off, or, even just, it doesn't have to be, it could be cleaning, even just something as simple as making sure that the bathroom is clean, spending 4 hours a day cleaning the bathroom. Those are things that can manifest with unmanaged anxiety. Agoraphobia. I had a client fearful of walking into the grocery store, just being in a crowded place can be a major trigger for anxiety in some people. Claustrophobia, being in smaller spaces. Social anxiety can be another issue, just not feeling confident in social situations, and feeling like you want to avoid other people. And what's interesting is this can be somebody that was very extroverted at one point in their life. I've talked to so many clients like that, where they say, I don't know how this happened. I used to love hanging out with people. I was in a club in my college, and all of a sudden now I've got this issue where I've got the social anxiety happening. So again, this doesn't happen overnight. It's a buildup of unmanaged stress long term, where now the body is just constantly operating on adrenaline.
Okay, and how severe does your anxiety need to be, or how can you even tell that your anxiety is severe or not severe, to the point where you might need medication? How can you tell that you might need medication or not?
So what we want to look at is functioning level. One is the ability to function and how it impacts their relationships. So if a person is struggling to get by day to day, for example, going to work, just having any kind of relationship with others that's meaningful, that's healthy, those could be red flags that this is severe. One of the red flags that I look at frequently is suicidal ideation. When it gets to that point, that's really when you want to make sure that you're seeking professional support, even if you may not act on the thoughts. The fact that the thoughts may be there, you definitely don't want to be alone in that situation, trying to manage that on your own. So I think it's always helpful to reach out to a professional mental health counselor who's licensed, who's certified to provide assistance. And I always recommend, starting out with the coping strategies first to try to manage. But again, if it's severe, for instance, some people with bipolar disorder, in their manic stages may have legal issues. They may be going out and stealing things they wouldn't normally do in their right mind. Someone who's out of touch with reality. Those are all indications of a level that has gone past just mild to moderate, where medication may be necessary.
Some people though have a fear from medication. They're scared that it might lead to further complications, or that it might cause mood swings or dependency. So, what would you say to people who have reservations when it comes to taking medication for anxiety?
So, medication is definitely a choice that you have to really look at carefully, and you have to weigh all your options first. So, medication is by no means a cure all, it's not going to fix everything. And sometimes I see people make the mistake, and when they're first struggling with something, they go straight to a psychiatrist. They're prescribed medication, but then the medication doesn't really do much because they're not also getting psychotherapy. They're not meeting with somebody who's going to help them make behavioral changes to address their issues. By behavioral, I mean, changes in your mindset, changes in your behaviors, your cognitive distortions. All of those things have to also be addressed holistically to manage the symptoms that one is dealing with. So I think that people definitely have a right to get all the answers and the information that they need before deciding to take medication, because there are side effects to every medication that we take. But as I mentioned earlier, if it's a matter of, I'm going to die and I can't even function, I'm getting into legal trouble, like even all the coping strategies I'm doing with my therapist are not helping me. I mean, that's an indication that you may need a little bit more help. There may be more of a chemical imbalance going on that also has to be addressed with the medication, but it always needs to be done in conjunction with learning coping strategies as well.
And can anyone suffer from anxiety? Like, can children and teenagers suffer from anxiety? And the reason I ask is because I feel that with young people, anxiety might not be taken as seriously because you think they're not old enough, they don't have stresses in their life. Why are they anxious, or why are they suffering from anxiety?
Absolutely. I mean, it can affect young people as well. And we're seeing an increase in younger and younger people experiencing symptoms of anxiety. And it just looks different for kids, right? Especially the younger ones. It may look like, having more tantrums or expressing a lot of fears, or just inability to fall asleep at night. There's a lot of signs that our kids can give us, but the wonderful thing is that the more informed we are as adults, the more we can model for our kids. I think we have to start with ourselves. Like, that is the key. Like, sometimes I work with children, and when I speak to the parents, they themselves are going through so much tension in their marriage, so much tension at home. And then you kind of put the puzzle pieces together and you see, okay, where this anxiety is coming from. They're not feeling safe. They're feeling like their environment is unpredictable. So with anything in life, just like if you have a flower that you're trying to grow, you don't try to fix the flower, you try to fix the environment that the flower is growing in. If it's not growing well enough, right, you make sure that it's getting enough sunlight, it's getting enough water, the proper soil. And that's the same thing with our kids, and it's the same thing with us, that yes, there's a lot of internal things going on, but we also need to look externally and say, what's happening in the environment that's contributing to this? What does my child need? Maybe they need more structure, maybe they need less time in front of video games, maybe they need more connection. It's looking into yourself and saying, how can I help with this, and how might something we're doing, or how might our family dynamic be contributing to the larger issue as well.
And as a mental health professional, what's been the most stressful time in your life, and what have you done to help you through it?
I believe that the most stressful time in my life, hands down, has been the past year, 2020, with this pandemic, both personally and professionally. This past year, 2020, I was pregnant. My mom was very sick at the time. At the same time, I had to homeschool my daughter because she couldn't go into school. And then I was working at home, trying to also help other people who were trying to navigate the pandemic and just felt like they were in a crisis. And meanwhile, here I was trying to figure out, how I was going to manage this crisis, this pandemic, because it's not like many mental health professionals have gone through that before. So I was trying to give other people the answers, and also trying to figure out my own journey in this, which was a real struggle. And I think really what helped me the most was, first of all, recognizing where my control lies, that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of all things. And I can only control what's in my ability, what's in my capability. And for me at the time, and even up until now, because we're still dealing with it, yes, we're getting vaccines, it's helping, but still, we're still in the midst of this. What's helped me is just deconstructing the stress, deconstructing the problem, and breaking it down, and just focusing on what's in front of me right now, or what I need to deal with today, not thinking about how I'm going to manage next week or the week after, or even sometimes a few days from now. I just focusing on what the priority is in the here and now, bringing myself back to the present moment. That has really been helpful to me. And of course, relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, energy, his the examples of the holy prophets, the imams, to get us through this time, that we know life is a test. It's going to be difficult. And the research shows when you're prepared for difficulty, when you know and you can anticipate challenging times, you become more resilient, because you know what to expect. We know we're in this test together. So that's what helped me. And those are some of the strategies I try to teach my clients when they're feeling anxiety, to not, get so stuck in the future, but just to keep grounding oneself, bringing oneself back to the present moment, and getting to that center again.
Thank you. And it's almost, I don't know if comforting is the right word to use, but the fact that you've been through stress, and you've been through something like this, it's like for our viewers to know that anyone really can suffer from stress and go through difficult times. So if there is anyone who's suffering, then they are not alone, basically. Sister Anisa, can you tell us, what does a panic attack look like, and how can we be an ally to someone who's experiencing this?
Yes, I'm so glad we're talking about this today, Sister Maryam, because with the clients I've worked with, especially in the past year, so many of them have been having more frequent panic attacks, or if they've never had a panic attack before, they've started to develop one. And I think part of it is the climate now that we're living in, where we're trying to navigate this pandemic. There's been so much change at one time. And I know even my friends have come to me personally and said, it's just been so scary. I don't know what this is. I didn't know what it was when I was experiencing it. So I think the first step for us to be able to manage a panic attack is to understand what it's about, what's going on physiologically that's contributing to it. So first of all, what you're going to experience if you have ever had a panic attack is this feeling as if you are going to possibly pass away, you're going to die, feeling like the room is moving around you, dizziness, just feeling this extreme need to lie down, sweaty palms, heart racing. Many times people will have a panic attack and they think they're having a stroke or they're having a heart attack. So what they do is they end up going to the hospital, and only to be told, well, everything looks clear. We did blood work. You're fine. There was no heart attack, but it looks like you're suffering from anxiety. And that's one of the first ways that they tend to realize that this is actually a panic attack that they've experienced. So what happens when somebody experiences a panic attack is they're going into this fight or flight mode, okay? And so what happens is when we become stressed, any one of us, our breathing tends to change. It becomes irregular. That irregular breathing sends a message to the amygdala in our brain, that primal part of our brain that tells us when we're in danger, and tells that brain that, hey, there's something wrong. So as a result, what happens is the brain, the amygdala tells the rest of the body to begin to respond. Almost every organ in the body begins to become affected. Not just the heart, which begins to race more and more, but even the pupils of our eyes, our kidneys, our stomachs, all of that gets affected in the moment, and we become hypervigilant. So as the body's pumping in the adrenaline and increasing that, we find it difficult to be able to function because it's trying to find an equilibrium again, and it's trying to, tell us to run, or to fight, right? That's where fight flight comes in. And sometimes people freeze up as well in terms of trying to deal with it. But what we want to do is begin to stimulate what's called the vagus nerve within the body. And that's the longest nerve within our body that affects our central nervous system. So when we stimulate that part of the body, for example, through deep breathing exercises, through even just things like putting cold water on your face, that can really help remind the body to go into rest and digest mode, that everything is okay. Because as you're deeply breathing, you're getting enough oxygen to your brain again, you're sending the message to the amygdala that everything is okay. So I think first of all, we can be an ally by just understanding the process, that this is not like a weakness of faith, that you need to go grab, your du'as and your Quran and just focus on that. Somebody who's in a panic attack, they're a lot of times not even in touch with reality. They can't do that. They can only focus on something as simple as their breathing, or just like I said, putting water in their face to snap themselves out of that fight or flight response. By understanding that there's a real physiological dynamic happening here that's contributing to the anxiety, and helping that person through it, reminding them of their strategies, that this is a time to breathe deeply. Maybe, you ask, how can I help? Sometimes just distracting that person with some conversation, telling them a story, letting them know that if they're having these moments, they can always call them and talk to them, or reminding them of other resources. It's not always easy to be there for somebody who is constantly experiencing panic attacks, but to remind them of things like hotlines that they can call, like the suicide prevention lifeline in the US. And there are many different international hotlines that you can access as well, to get somebody on the other line to just distract you a little bit, or to walk you through some coping strategies that in the moment you might not be thinking of. So I think that's the best way to be an ally. Just ask how I can help, what would help you in this moment, and just be very supportive. Don't make them feel bad for experiencing this, or shamed in any way. This can happen to anybody, absolutely, and it can happen just even with a severe situation, a traumatic incident. It can happen more often after giving birth to a child. There's so many different things that could prompt a person to experience panic attacks more. So we just have to be aware, inshallah, and ask how we can help.
And just to excuse my ignorance for asking this question, but do you have to be suffering from anxiety to have a panic attack, or can you just have a panic attack even if you're not someone who suffers from anxiety?
That's a great question. So, I think that anybody, it can, at least most people, 1 in 3 people, the research says, will have a panic attack at least one time in their life. So chances are you and I will at least have at least one panic attack in life. And you don't have to have anxiety to have it. But I think that is a sign, when you do have it, that you need to really reevaluate your lifestyle and what you're doing for your own self-care. Because, if you've had it once, the likelihood of having a relapse with it again is more likely. So there are some people who will have it one time in their life and then they never had it again. And maybe they won't have it until 7 years later. But then there's another person who will have it once, and then it's like a roller coaster, because once you've had the panic attack, then some people actually have panic about having a panic attack, which makes the panic attacks more frequent, you see. So it becomes a vicious cycle. So of course we want to be prevention focused, inshallah.
When it comes to depression, I know that it's linked to unhelpful thinking habits. Would you say that's the same thing when it comes to anxiety, that unhelpful thinking habits can have an impact on that? And what kind of things do people engage in that can contribute to anxiety?
So yes, absolutely. It is similar. And I'll tell you what, most of the time when somebody has clinical anxiety, they also have depression with it. So it's not one or the other. Usually depression and anxiety tend to co-occur with one another. So people will engage a lot of times in maladaptive thinking, such as one of those unhelpful thinking styles is prediction with anxiety, where we think we can anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And we start ruminating on what's going to happen next week. And it's like, we don't even know we don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow, right? Let alone next week. You got to bring yourself back to the present moment. Or catastrophizing, looking at the future and thinking that the worst possible thing is going to happen, even though it's probably not. Sometimes we try to read other people's minds, and that can play a big role with depression and anxiety, because we're worried that we're being judged, or somebody has a negative perception of us, even though we can't read their minds. We don't really know what they're thinking. Another strategy is when we tend to focus on automatic negative thoughts. We all have these automatic negative thoughts or ants in our head each day, but when we choose to focus in on those thoughts and allow them to control our mood, that can definitely contribute to more anxiety, more depression. And it's also nature and nurture too. As a child, maybe we had parents who tend to be a little bit more anxious in certain situations. And so what messages might we be holding on to that our parents conveyed to us when we were younger about ourselves or about our actions? Maybe we don't feel confident in our decisions because it was always questioned by our parents, or we were made to feel shame for what we were about to do. So, and this is not to blame parents, because they're doing the best that they can, that they know how to do, but it is on us to now, as adults or later in our life, reevaluate whether or not these messages that we received in childhood or early adulthood really are helpful and serve us in any way in terms of being mentally healthy.
And from an Islamic perspective, what can we take away from our faith and our traditions just to make anxiety or panic attacks more manageable?
So, hands down, I believe that the best way to approach the issue of anxiety from the Islamic tradition is through the Holy Quran, and especially through Surah Duha, where Allah talks about the morning brightness and swears by the morning brightness, this dawn that is coming, and says by the night when it covers the darkness that your Lord has not forsaken you, Ya Muhammad. Your Lord has not detested you. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just memorize this and look at it carefully, because this was sent down at a time where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was in a state of distress. He was a little bit anxious because he hadn't received a revelation for some time. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to comfort him in that moment by telling him, I haven't forsaken you. Did I not find you an orphan and give you refuge? Did I not find you poor and make you sufficient? Right? And I think it's so beautiful. And oftentimes my clients will be like, well, that's not talking to me. Allah is talking to Prophet Muhammad. But of course, we know that anything, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reveals this to the Prophet, he's also giving us a message too, that in our darkest moments, when we're being tested with anxiety or stressful situations, there is a dawn. There is that dawn, that brightness, that light is at the end of the tunnel for all of us. And he has not forsaken us, and he is with us. And so you see in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly working on these negative cognitions, right? And we have to do the same with ourselves. This is what, we all have this self-talk, has Allah left me? Has he forsaken me? Why would he put me through this situation? Why can't he just answer my dua? I wonder if he really even cares about me. Maybe I'm just being punished for something that I did in the past. It's really important that we recognize we're here to be tested. And whether it's a test or something we're having to atone for, our response is the same. And that is that we have to keep trying. We have to keep striving towards him. And we have to always have a positive opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to get through our struggles and to know that He is going to find an opening for us, inshallah.
Inshallah. As we're approaching the end of the show, Sister Anisa, what resources are available to people who are struggling with anxiety?
So there are wonderful organizations that are doing great work of just educating individuals on the signs. National Alliance for Mental Illness is one of them that I can think of. ActiveMinds.org has a lot of great resources for those struggling with anxiety, especially for college students. I really advise somebody who's struggling with anxiety to make a list of things that they know can help them. It might not be like an official website or a resource, but maybe, it's just certain things they know in that moment they might forget to rely on that would actually be helpful to them. So maybe that is like an inspirational quote, a certain dua that brings them a lot of peace. Just smelling some lavender essential oil, taking a bath, just going for a walk outside. Make a list of what you know helps you, and what might help you might not really help somebody else. Maybe they have something different in terms of their self-care to manage it. But the key is to prepare in advance, because when you're in the moment, you can't think straight, right? There's not enough oxygen going to your brain. So you have to have a preparation time to anticipate when you're feeling anxious, and also build in self-care to prevent anxiety for all of us throughout our week. It's not selfish to take care of yourself and put yourself first. When you put yourself first, you have more in your cup to pour out to others. You're a better husband, you're a better mom, you're a better daughter, you're just better, employee, everything. So I love there's some great apps out there as well. Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer. There's an Islamic app called Sabr app. For those of you who have smartphones, you can even go on YouTube, and there are YouTube videos that will help you if you're struggling with a panic attack in the moment. You can sit and listen to it so that it will help you, walk you through some steps to figure out how to get out of it, inshallah.
Sister Anisa, I know you already gave us a few examples, but would you be able to give us 3 practical examples or ways that someone can overcome anxiety and panic attacks?
First of all, we want to look at our lifestyle. Okay, so making sure that you're not drinking a lot of caffeinated beverages, energy drinks, marijuana usage. All of this, right, contributes to anxiety because caffeine is a stimulant, right? So making sure that you're minimizing any kind of chemical, any kind of drug that, first of all, you shouldn't be doing anyway. But we all hear of individuals in the community who experiment with things that they shouldn't, right? And sometimes people are taking it for medicinal reasons, and then they realize, wow, this is contributing to more anxiety. So you have to really look at your lifestyle, what you're putting into your body. Also, nutrition plays a big role. So eating a lot of foods that are high in folic acid, high in omega-3, having a balanced diet that's giving your body the fuel that you need, getting enough sleep each day. Meditation is a big one. If you can dedicate a few moments each day to regularly practice meditation, what you can do is pull on that energy that you feel in those times into those high stress situations. So it becomes almost like an emergency coping mechanism. So there are so many ways that you can manage your anxiety, inshallah. And it's just about making it matter, right? As this show is about mental health matters, we have to make our mental health matter each week and ask ourselves what we have done to help prevent any kind of anxiety from manifesting into something that's severe or chronic, inshallah, so that we can serve our families and we can serve, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the best of our abilities.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Sister Anisa. You've given us so much insight onto this, onto this topic about anxiety and panic attacks, and a lot of strategies and tools that can help us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers who've been listening today. And we'll be back next time, same time next week, inshallah. Take care. Ma'as salama. Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.